I wanted to lead off the premiere edition of that NFL pregame show on all of our outlets with this story that kind of hit me a couple of ways. Anybody who's a 49er fan or Patriot fan knows the name Russ Francis, the big fellow, the big tight end who was such a dominant tight end in the NFL, but such a sweetheart of a man off the field. Was killed in a plane crash. And I had to have this man, Bob Hyldburg, Patriots historian, and a very dear friend of mine, come on and share some stories about Russ Francis to, kick off the premiere edition of this show. Bob, how are you, my man?
Excellent, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. When you sent me
Excellent.
that message and we were on the air, I'm still shaken by it because I remember so much. I remember Russ Francis. He was one of my first favorite tight ends, like along with Charlie Young when I first got into football. But the big fella, Russ Francis, man, when you say that name, you being a historian just like
Right.
remember a lot about the guy on the field and off the field.
Absolutely. And one of the things about Russ Francis is that he was fearless. We started, I've not known Russ for 30 something years. And over the summer, we were in the process of collaborating on a book on his life, which was really a brutal thing to hear that, we started and we weren't even going to sure if it was going to be a fiction or nonfiction because of some of the people that he didn't really want to identify.
Right.
So we were putting some stuff together and the stories, I've heard and I've spent many hours with him learning about his life and what motivated him to do that, to do whatever he did in life, whether it was surfing or jumping out of planes or flying, or for that matter, playing for Bill Walsh, and winning a Super Bowl championship because he had retired from football. And then Bill Walsh brought him back in and he wins the Super Bowl. But it really started, he played 1 year in college in Oregon, tremendous athlete. The first time he ever picked up a javelin, they said, this is how you throw it. And the first throw that he threw in high school, he set a record that lasted for 17 years. He was that talented an athlete, And the Patriots, when they drafted him in the first round, Bucko Kilroy, who was the general manager, he kind of told, Russ said, we want to draft you for football. And he's like, I don't even play football. He only played 1 year in college. In his senior year, he said, I don't want to do it anymore. And then when he came to the Patriots, he had no idea how to even play the game. But he was such a natural athlete that, he certainly became a big blocker and a huge blocker. And, to play with Hannah and George Webster and some of those guys that are in the college and Pro Football Hall of Fame, he learned quick how to play the game because of their intensity. But the story that he initially told me is that Chuck Fairbanks calls his house in Oregon, and he's working on a farm in Oregon. And he's working milking the cows, and they had three guys, his brothers, and every other day you got to milk the cows. So he's a mile away from the home milking the cows, and his brother answers the phone, and he gets a phone call and says, we'd like to draft Russ Francis. So that's all the brother heard. And he says, Mom, go talk to this guy. I'll go get Russ. And the guy runs out there. He says, hey, I think you're going to get drafted. And Russ thought he was getting drafted into the Army. He said, I don't want to go into the military because this was 1975, and this is when they drafted.
Right.
So he comes in and he's like, man, what am I getting drafted for? And then he gets drafted to play football for the New England Patriots. And he's like, I don't want to play football. And I don't even know where New England is. I'm from Hawaii and Oregon. Where is New England? So Chuck Fairbanks says, well, I understand you're a baseball player and you got drafted by the Kansas City Royals. He says, yes, I'd rather play baseball. He says, I don't like contact. I don't like getting hit. He says, well, the Red Sox are right around the street. They're only half an hour up. New England, where we play, is about a half hour from Fenway Park. Oh, okay, I'll go out there. And if I can go to the Red Sox game, you get me tickets to the Red Sox game, I'll play for you. And then they mentioned the salary. And he's, you're going to give me that much money? All right, I'm in, But he was very hesitant, and then he shows up, and kind of his career takes off.
Oh man. I'm not getting drafted into the army. Oh my god.
Yeah, no, we're drafted. What does drafted mean? You have no
Yeah,
idea.
the draft was still going
Still
at
going
the
on
time
that
when
time.
he was, yeah, at the time he got the call, and if that call were to happen to me, I'd be confused also. I'm like, I'm not going into this. I'm not going into the service. But when he retired, and then
Yeah,
Bill Walsh talked him out of retirement and plucked him and brought him to San Francisco. It's like a light turned on with Russ Francis. Of course, he won the Super Bowl with the Niners in 1984,
right.
being part of the team that went 15-1, and he had a big part on that team, because some of the stars that you were starting to hear of, Bubba Paris, Steve Wallace, Jesse Sapolo, fellow Hawaiian,
Right.
we're just starting to round into shape. But that at that time, even though the Niners were 15-1, you know, outside of Joe Montana, they were still a relative unknown. And that was the same in
Exactly.
1981. And when Russ Francis was plucked by Bill Walsh to play for the 49ers in that system, in that West Coast offense, it was a lot for him to learn. But as you said, Bob, he was fearless. He wanted
Yeah.
to learn it. He wanted to
Right.
play.
Yeah. So when he was a rookie, he was the roommate of Darryl Stingley. So Stingley had been there for a couple of years,
Right.
and Stingley had he was fearless as well. So he would go over the middle, and unfortunately, that's how he got a broken neck going over the middle. And
Right.
Grogan had a tendency of throwing the ball high, so you had to go
Mhm.
up and get it. But Russ was there for a year or two before Darryl got hurt,
Mhm.
and he says, if Darryl, who's 5'11" and 180 pounds, I'm 6'6", 240. If he can go over the middle, I can go over the middle.
Yeah.
And one of the coaches that was around back then, Raymond Berry, the Hall of Fame receiver and coach of the Patriots, he says, when you catch the ball, bring it to your body and don't catch it with one hand, because Russ had a
Right.
tendency of being flamboyant. I'll go up there with one hand and catch it.
Yep.
So he had to learn those techniques, not only catching it, but then bringing it to his body so that they wouldn't knock the ball away. But
Mhm.
Howard Cosell made a big deal out of him making a few big plays against the Steelers and the Raiders. And when Howard Cosell did his Monday Night Highlights, and
Mhm.
he called him all-world tight end. And there was one time that Russ called him and said, "Hey, stop calling me all-world tight end, because when I played against the Raiders and the Steelers and other teams too, but especially those two teams that were dominant at that time," he says, "when I caught
Mhm.
the ball, they hit me and they smacked me in the throat and in the different parts of my body that shouldn't have been hit, and tried to break my nose and tried to do all that kind of stuff. Oh, Mr. All World, nice play, but here's another shot for you, because you could do that back then without
Yeah.
a lot of
Yes.
penalties.
Eh,
So he got the crap. So he called Howard and said, "Stop calling me that." And Howard Cosell said, "Get tough or get out." And that was it. And he hung up the phone. So Russ got tough, and he's like, but Russ never really got hurt. You see all these guys getting injured, and he would go over the middle, and he says he had a way. And one of the ways that he really dealt with that is he would go surfing the day before, or sometimes even the morning before. Now
Mhm.
we're playing in New England. Where does he go surfing in New England?
Exactly.
He would go to Maine. He would go to the Cape. He would go to Rhode Island. He knew these spots, and sometimes he would fly because he loved to fly. And he'd just take a plane. He'd pop in an hour ride to wherever the waves were hitting. He'd surf for
Right.
an hour or two, and then fly into Norwood, which is about 10 minutes from Foxborough, and practice the next day. But there was one time that we had about a 2-hour break for lunch.
Mhm.
And he says, "This is a beautiful day." He took a couple of his teammates and they went to Nantucket, which is an island off of New England.
Mhm.
They had lunch in this island, but then they got fogged in and they couldn't fly back to practice. And by the time they
Right.
got back to practice, it was 3 or 4 o'clock. And where were you? Well, we were in Nantucket. How'd you get to Nantucket? Well, we flew over there. It's only a 10-minute ride by plane. Don't you do that again.
See, this is why I love having you on my programs, because of these stories, these wonderful, funny stories that you tell about different people. We're paying homage to Russ Francis here on the kickoff of that NFL pregame show. We're counting you down to kickoff. Bob Hyldburg, very different, and Patriots historian, joining me. When he played with the 49ers, when he played in Super Bowl 19, there were two plays in the second quarter when the Niners, scored 21 points in that quarter. There were two plays over the middle. Right. One where he ran over Lyle Blackwood. Right. Lyle Blackwood had this look of, what the hell just hit me? And then the next play, that gained 20 yards. And then the next play, they run a couple of fakes, one to Craig and one to Tyler. And Montana zipped one over the middle to Russ Francis again. And they had to bring it down. And half of that Dolphins defense going, who is this guy?
I mean, to be 6'6", I mean, he was Gronk before Gronk. Gronk's about the same size, maybe an inch taller. Yes. And Gronk, you throw it up 15 feet, Gronk can go up and get it. But Russ Francis was, I mean, one of the things that Joe Theismann has never gone over, there was a Superstars competition that they used to have in the early 80s. Where they get all the best athletes and they would do all these competitions, swimming and running and lifting weights and all that kind of stuff. So there was a 100-yard dash, and Russ Francis beat Joe Theismann in a 100-yard dash. And Joe Theismann has not got over it to this day that a tight end that weighs 240 pounds at 6'6" was beat him in a 100-yard dash on national TV. And Russ was just a natural athlete, just gifted with speed and power and athletic ability. So those kind of stories come out. And just to back up a little bit, I mean, when he was playing for the 49ers, he would actually land his plane in the parking lot and just leave his plane there. And then after practice, rather than driving his car to practice with Bill Walsh says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'll just land over there in the side section over there and watch out for the wires and then take off from the parking lot." I mean, he was crazy. Bill Walsh hated that. But you're going to crash someday. I'm fine. I'm fearless. I know what I'm doing.
He landed in the parking lot.
Landed in the parking lot all the time. He didn't do it once, And
this was before the 49ers moved their base of operations to Santa Clara. He would land in the parking lot at Candlestick Park.
Yeah. So there was one time. So we used to have a guy that would do the traffic reports from a helicopter.
Right.
And there was a guy named Joe Green of the WBZ radio program, national program, and it was called Joe Green and the BZ Copter. And he would kind of hover 100, 500 feet up and say, watch out for this, watch out for that, avoid this. This is way before GPS and all that. So back in the 70s and 80s. Yep. So Russ said, hey, my practice is until 9 o'clock in the morning. You have to do this between the driving hours of 6 and 8. Can I fly your helicopter someday and just kind of practice? So Russ Francis is flying the plane, and the guy that's giving the reports, he doesn't have to fly and do the report. So he's looking out, watch out for this accident, go this way, go that way. And Russ says, all right, all you got to do is drop me off in the parking lot at Schaefer Stadium. And as he's flying to Schaefer Stadium, Russ sees there's 2 inches of snow on the field. And he says, I'm from Hawaii. I'm from Oregon. We don't get any snow there. I don't want to practice in 2 or 3 inches of snow. So rather than leaving the helicopter, in the parking lot, he's flying the helicopter. He says, I'm going to hover the field. I'm going to go up. I'm going to use the propellers to blow off the snow. So he starts going down from the 10 to the 20 to the 50, and he takes about 3 minutes to go through the whole thing, and the propellers are blowing all the snow off, and then he kind of lands at the 50-yard line. And gets out of the helicopter. Now, by this time, everyone is freaking out. What is this helicopter? Who's flying it? What are they doing? And then they see this guy 6'6" coming out and waving, hey, I cleared the field, coach. And then Joe, who was the pilot, he gets in and he takes off. And And they're like, come here, Russ, don't you ever do that again. Don't you
Right.
have anything to do with landing planes, landing helicopters, and doing it on the field. No problem, coach. I won't do it again, but I just didn't want to practice in the snow.
He didn't want
Crazy, crazy things.
That story is better than the snowplow story of Patriots
Yeah.
Dolphins fame, where you clear a spot to hold for the field.
Yeah,
He
with
didn't
the
want to
snowplow.
practice in 2 feet of snow, so he
2 inches, just 2 inches. It was not much. It was just enough
Right,
that you
he
could.
did
It was
himself.
fluffy, so
Right.
he just kind of went, and the thing just kind of flew away because it was fluffy. But he said, "I don't want to practice in the snow. I'm going to clear the field." And of course, by the time he's there and he's hovering, everyone is kind of running on the field and waving at him, and he's waving. Give me a second. Let me get to the 10, the 20, and then he kind of comes back and lands it on the 50. So when I was in the process of writing this book and writing, some of the history of the team, I would ask players, give me something that's unique that you did on the field, that maybe I can look up and research. And he says, I promise you that there will never anyone land a helicopter on the 50-yard line. It happened on the field. It only happened once. I'm going to be the only person to do it. And I said, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, nowadays you got domes and all that and wires and the camera, but back then it was nothing like that. It was just pop in and pop out. It was nothing like you see nowadays. This is probably 1975 or 76, way back in the day where there was no obstructions to
none, no obstructions whatsoever. Oh goodness, that was
all right. So I got one more plain story that's going to blow your mind too.
What you got for me? Oh, gracious.
Gap them.
Okay. One more plain story. What you got for me?
So this is unbelievable, but it's true. So in 1975, the Patriots are 3-11. In 1976, they start clicking. They got Mike Haynes, Claiborne. I mean, they got everyone. They're loaded. Spirit of 76. Everyone's cheering for them. And Oakland comes to Schaefer Stadium and they beat the Raiders 48-17. Oakland's only loss of the year. So Oakland, only loses one game. We lose 3. So now we got to play a playoff game at the Oakland Coliseum. And during this game, this is the old, roughing the passer, Ken Stable. But during the fourth quarter, there's a spot where the Patriots have 3rd and 5. And Phil Villapiano is trying to stop Russ Francis from having a big game, which Russ did have a big game. But there was a 3rd and 5, and Russ gets bear hugged by Phil Villapiano on a pass that hits Russ right in the chest, but he can't get his arms around it because he's getting bear hugged by Villapiano. He can't really move his arms. So the ref's like, I didn't say anything, no call. And Russ Francis is like, man, if I, all I had to do was catch it, but I couldn't collapse my hands because they were being held by Villapiano. So we ended up losing the game. Well, Villapiano makes the Pro Bowl. And Russ, during the offseason, would have airplane tour where he would take people and fly them all around Hawaii and show them the volcanoes and the beautiful sights. So Villapiano comes out after the Super Bowl for the Pro Bowl, and Russ calls him up and says, hey, I got this touring. You guys won Super Bowl. Congratulations. I wanted to take you and your wife out on me and show you all these beautiful sights. So Villapiano's a big guy too. So they go out, and as Russ is showing him the volcanoes, he would tip the plane a little bit so you can get a nice view of the volcano, and then he'd straighten it out. So he's coming up on this really nice volcano. He's setting it up nice. This is going to be beautiful. I'm going to tip the plane. But as he tips the plane, he opens the door.
Oh, no.
So Villapiano sees the door open now because he's already kind of seeing a couple of these, but you can't really see through the window. So here's a better view. He opens the door, and as he opens the door, he goes back and tries to unbuckle Villapiano's seatbelt. To say, yeah, here's a really good view for you. So now Villapiano is kind of pressing himself against the ceiling, and And so he doesn't fall out. And his wife is trying to kind of take off her seatbelt because she wants to strangle him and scratch Russ to be like, what are you doing? She is screaming hysterically. And he only does this for about 3 or 4 seconds. He's got it sideways. Yeah. They're looking straight down into the volcano. And then he levels it out and says, hey, remember that holding call that wasn't called? Hey, now we're even. I didn't forget. You should hear Russ Filippiano tell that story because he tells it better than I do. But
gosh, that is great.
He was a character.
Oh man, Bob Hyldburg joining me as we kick off that NFL pregame show, paying homage and tribute to the big tight end Russ Francis to start the show. And we had to start the show that we had to start this series with some laughs. Bob, thank you very much. I love you. Thanks for coming on and sharing these stories and always sharing stories with me. I appreciate you.
Well, a tribute to Russ. Russ was a character. He always had a smile, always the aloha, and enjoy your life. And that's what he did to the fullest. And he was a very caring guy. He loved to help people. And his experience with the Patriots and certainly the 49ers, he's developed friends throughout the world. So anyone that's going through any kind of issues with that, my condolences to you, because Russ really touched a lot of people out there and impacted a lot. Yeah. And he was an important part of my life too, because hearing his stories and jumping out of planes, and he cheated death many times. But unfortunately, that this last one just caught up with him at the wrong place at the wrong time. But he enjoyed his life, and that's all you can ask is just when you're going through stuff, just do the best you can, enjoy it, and just live your life.
You have to. You absolutely have to. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you.
All right. God bless you. Go Pats.
We're just getting started here on that NFL pregame show. Coming up, we're going to do our picks, and then I got some more funny stuff for you. Back after this.